Welcome to the sharpening lesson in the photography class. This lesson has been grouped with the landscape photos for a reason. That is because sharpening is not always very effective on, let's say, portrait photos with faces. If it is used on portrait photos, it should be done in moderation and very carefully. I have here some examples of some good portrait photography that you might want to use it on. Of course, anything that has texture. I have here just a couple shots of a granite rock for texture. Here's just a bunch of rocks. Here's the elephant rocks. This is in Iron County where these photos were taken. Iron County, Missouri, where they have the big, huge elephant rocks. Here is a wall, and this is the one we're going to play with the most because it has a person in it, including the wall. So we want most of this to get high sharpening except for the person. And here's some more landscape photography just to give you an idea. This one here we would need to be careful with these two. With the sky, you don't want to over sharpen the sky, and so you would have to be using layer masks to maybe do it less on the sky, maybe putting gray on the layer mask where the sky is instead of all white. Of course, this one here with trees would be good. We're going to actually use this. You'll see why here in a minute. But for most of them, we're going to use this one, and we will be masking him out, which is similar to masking out the sky, but it just works best with landscape photos. First, we're going to use the Sharpen tool, and this utilizes the brush tool for specific areas. I don't use this a whole lot because I don't find many uses for it, but if you have a whole image and you just want one small part of it blurred, maybe you're just doing some eyelashes, or you want something in the photo to stand out and be the focal point. Maybe you want to just sharpen the cake in the photo, or maybe just one part of it's blurry and you need to fix that one small part that's blurry. It is actually a tool in the toolbar, and it's found with the blur tool and the smudge tool. So if you right click on that tool, you're going to be able to find it. So let's bring in an image, just any old image I got in here. I just had several available for us to play with. I always like to dock my images so they zoom better. And let's say I only want to sharpen this tree back here. Maybe because of depth of field it got blurry. I'm making up stuff. Yes, I am. So I right click on here, and there's the Sharpen tool. It's grouped with the blur tool because sharpening is the opposite of blurring, and you can use your bracket keys just as you can for any other tool that utilizes brushes to make that brush larger and smaller, and then you simply go over that area. And you can see how well it did in just sharpening that tree. Undo before and after. Let's go to the before and look at the settings up here. You can change your brushes. Of course, a soft brush is better because it has that kind of Gaussian blurred out edges. This is your size of your brush, which I adjusted using the bracket keys. You can change it to the different modes to play with it, and the strength. The strength is what is most important, that if you want to do it subtly and not overdo it, I would take that strength down, and you can see this, you could do it several times until you get it just where you want it, because that first setting I think we're beginning to get over again. See all those pixels coming in? Yeah, and I'm backing out and you can see the pixels going away. But if you get too much, it gets pixelated, and so you just want to do it ever so slightly. Of course, it does make permanent changes, and that's what is not good with a lot of these sharpening techniques in the beginning. So let's move on to the next one. We have the Enhance and Unsharp mask. I see this being recommended and to be used a lot, and I'm not sure why. I don't like it because I don't have enough control over it, because it does make permanent changes to your image. And I just don't like it. But we're going to look at it really closely. It's useful, most useful on scanned images, and so I'm going to bring that scanned image into Photoshop to play with after we review this PowerPoint. It blurs the original image, which is subtracted from the original to detect the edges and create an unsharp mask. It's kind of confusing because we think we want to sharpen something, so why would we grab an unsharp mask, something that has the word unsharp in it? When you're new to Photoshop and Photoshop Elements and you see the word unsharp, you think it's going to make something blurry, which would be the opposite of sharp. But what all of these actually do is to blur the original image. I put in here behind the scenes magic, because you don't really see all this happening, but what the filter is actually doing is duplicating an image, blurring the original to the original duplicate to subtract from the original to detect the edges. And don't try to understand it, just know that that's what it does, and it's doing this all behind the scenes. And as I said, all of these sharpening methods actually use blurring. So and you'll notice that as we go along you'll be able to kind of see that. It's just kind of hard to explain. You can go on the internet and search if you really want to know more. I like to just accept the fact that that's what it's doing. And so here is where you're going to find your unsharp mask, right there under the Enhance drop down menu. And you're going to see a pop-up box, and the first one setting slider is for amount, and the amount is the contrast to the edges, or the width of the halo used. This is a little bit confusing, so I'm going to go on and then come back to explain. The radius is the amount of blur to the original, the before halos. Okay, I think radius should be the top and then the amount, because I think these are backwards too, if you're really thinking about what they do. If you are familiar with the Gaussian blur and you blur something, you know how it kind of just blurs out the edges. The edges get softer as they go out. Well, that's what the radius does. The radius determines the amount of blur to the original, the amount of halo or surrounding area that from all the edges it detects that goes out and blurs. And then the amount is the width of that halo that you choose to use. So your amount is always going to be higher, I think, than your radius, because if you don't, you're not going to have that blurring out. Does that make sense? And all of this doesn't really ever matter if you just get in there and play until you get something that looks right. The third one is the threshold. This is the level of brightness to determine the edges. So it has to, and like I said, these are all almost backwards. You need to come from the top to the bottom. The threshold determines how many edges it's going to find, basically. This is great for getting the eyelashes and not the skin, because the one big thing is that I have problems with the Unsharp mask is the getting the skin and sharpening it. I don't like my skin sharpened. I like it soft. So, if you go backwards, you determine the number of edges to utilize, and they determine that based on the where the brightness changes, and then you apply the radius as to the amount of blur to those edges it finds, the before halos, how many, and then you determine how much of that blurred out you want to use on those edges that it found. So you almost have to look at these going backwards. The threshold, if you use a low threshold, it will find every edge. And if you use a higher threshold, it will find fewer edges. So if you're trying to get the eyelashes and not the skin, for instance, you're going to want to raise it. But if you raise it too high, it's not going to find anything. It's not going to find any edges. So let's go look at this. And as I said, this works best on scanned images. So I have a scanned in image that a professional photographer took of my boys, and this was taken during the oldest's senior photos, and I brought all the boys out to get a snapshot of them in their Boy Scout uniforms. So I'm going to go ahead, as usual. I recommend duplicating your background layer. I just press Control J, and you can see my scanner is dirty. It has all this stuff on it, so I'm actually going to go in to Noise, and I'm going to get the dust and scratches. That's way too high, which is actually going to blur it a little more. I think we just need a 2. Let's just do that. Get rid of those little dust and speckles. So you see our image is rather blurred, the scanned in image, and I'm going to zoom in on his face so you can see this working. We are going to go to the Enhance drop down menu and Unsharp Mask, and here's that pop-up that we were talking about. And basically, let's start all the way down. So I'm going to raise the threshold where it finds the edges, and I don't want it to be you don't see any changes happening right now. I don't want it to be too low, because I am working with faces here, and we'll go back and adjust that later. Then I'm going to raise the radius, which is how much of the halo we have, and you're not seeing too many changes here either. And then I'm going to range the amount of the halos those bring back in. So you can see here it's grabbing and kind of making his edge of his mouth kind of bad. So I can raise the radius. I said the wrong word. So preview, before, after, not doing too much. Let's change the threshold down. The threshold's too high. See, if we take the threshold all the way down, look at the difference between before and after, and you can see how it is making this not so pleasant around his face, too dark. If we zoomed out, you can see the before and the after, and it seems to really be sharpening it up nice. But when you go into a closer view where you might be printing, and then it doesn't look so nice. We're going to raise that threshold so it doesn't make so much change. I guess it does actually work best from top to bottom, and then you go back and adjust. It works best for understanding if you do the bottom to the top. So you can also zoom in on this preview and do a before and after by just clicking down with your mouse on this hand to see. And you don't want too much on this face. So basically you play around, and then here is the before and the after that I chose, and so it's actually very subtle. Less is more in this instance. So that is that, and I could have worked harder and probably got some better settings in there, but we've got so much to learn. Okay, enhance, adjust sharpness. With this one, it's just like the last one. It also makes permanent changes, so it's much harder to select out just one area. It's a very good tool, but you don't get the ability like the last one as easily to select certain parts of the image. So here is where you find the adjust sharpness. So let's go back in here, and we're going to bring in this photo that I'm going to work a lot with. So this is a photo we're going to work a lot with, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer several times because we're going to be playing with it. And we're going to go to the enhance and adjust sharpness, and just as I said before, every one of these methods works with blurring, and so you have that similar radius tool here that shows how far out it's going to blur, and we're doing the behind the scenes magic of having two images right on top of each other that you can't see it, but that's what this tool is doing. And then you have the familiar amount. You don't have the threshold in this one, but in this one the radius is, remember how much halo, how much blur it makes, and in this case you get a choice of different kinds of blurring. You have the Gaussian blur, you have the lens blur, which sometimes if you are taking photographs and your settings are such that maybe the outer edges of around the edge get blurred. That would be that one, and motion blur, which actually I have some motion blur in this as he's running to jump through, but I like to use the Gaussian blur mode, and we can choose to more refined if we want, which would be similar to the threshold, changing the threshold. If you're using the motion blur, you can change the angle of the motion. And so basically this is the same thing as before. I'm going to raise this radius way up so you can see what it does and bring the amount down. They're basically working the same way, but see, you can see this doesn't make any change. Well, a little bit. I guess it's okay to have the amount lower than the radius. I think it doesn't make any sense. So because it just doesn't blur it correctly, blurs it funny. See, now we're getting too much blur, but you can see over here what's happening if I turn off the preview before and after, and how much that is sharpening. If you click down on the image, you see there's a square, and that's where it's going to focus on this image. So if I was actually trying to set this so it was his hair, I could click right down here, and that's where it brings in the focus. But you can see before and after how this is not good on people. I like this softness of him but I like the blurring of the background. Of course, that's too high. So what we could do with this one, even though it makes permanent changes to the image, after we accept whatever we want, I was just playing around a lot so you could see. You can play with your own images. What we could do with this one, after we get that really sharp wall going on, which is actually too sharp, way too sharp, way too sharp. I am in Photoshop Elements 10 right now. 9 also has the handy add layer mask and white reveals on the mask and black conceals. So I'm going to get my brush tool and I have black as my foreground color, and I'm going to make sure I have a nice soft brush and probably take down the opacity and just draw in here and make this effect less on him. And what this is doing is making this not effective for here and allowing the one underneath to show through. So if I didn't have this one underneath, this mask wouldn't be working. But I do it a little bit more particularly, but that's how you can use this and deselect some of the area so it doesn't get sharpened there. So let's go back and we're going to do the next one, the Highpass Filter. Okay, this is my favorite. This is the one I like to use. We're going to duplicate the layer, then go to Filter, Other, Highpass, and make our settings. Then we're going to either put the overlay or the soft light blending mode on our duplicated layer, and we can adjust the opacity if we need to. So we are going to just get rid of these layers we used playing. Let me get rid of the right way. Let's duplicate this several times just so we have some extra to play with. So we're going to go to the Filter, Other, Highpass, and what you want to do with this one is to put the radius just where you begin to see the edges, and there's that darn familiar word again, radius. But what you can see what this is also doing, it's not just finding the edges, but it's also blurring it out and turning it gray. See, here's not finding any edges, here's finding too many edges, and are actually, you can see it's not finding enough edges here either. And so you want to back it down to where it's turning it mostly gray. You can see this is like the Unsharp mask, where the Unsharp mask is actually making a mask just like that white mask in our layers palette, where it's masking out part of the area. If we bring this all the way up, it is not masking out enough. You see too much of the original, and of course down here it's not masking, it's masking out everything. So you need to go somewhere in the middle, and what you're going to have to do is, if you don't like it after you apply the blending mode, hit the back button and do it over. But I would suggest right around in here is good, just so you can see the edges. You don't want to go up too high on that. Now you can see we've got this layer and then the original below it, and all I'm going to do is choose either the overlay or the soften. Now I'm going to zoom in for y'all and let you see before and after. You see how wonderful this is? Before and after. It does the same thing as the other tools, but I think it does a bit better job. Here it is with the overlay. The overlay kind of makes it even more sharpened. I actually like the soft light best, but as you come over here and you look at him and you see the before and the after, the sharpening is not very appealing to me. So that's where we're going to add the layer mask. Get that brush tool with a low opacity and draw some gray in here. If you have blackish or foreground and you lower the opacity, it's lowering the opacity of the black, which is making gray. So it's actually painting gray on the layer mask. And so, you would allow this change on everywhere, and where I'm painting it's going to show in the below image just as before. So I would take that, look what it did in his shorts. Oh, sharpening is horrible. If you're ever doing wedding photos and you're trying to sharpen up the beautiful background, be very careful if because I have had this experience, I've learned from playing. If you sharpen the whole photo and you think, wow, that really made their tuxedos look cool, but then zoom in and you're going to see some pixelated colors on that black, and you're going to want to just grab that mask tool and unapply it from the black tuxedos. It just the darker colors don't work well. In fact, I could maybe give you an example if I change this back. Well, maybe not. This isn't the best example of it, but yeah, you don't want to sharpen those black tuxes. But now you can see the before and the after here, and how this actually worked really well. I really like this after. Makes a great method, and it is definitely a winner. So sharpening is the opposite of blur. I've said that several times already. So if you think about that concept, how can you utilize that concept? To soften a photo. So if you invert that high pass photo layer, you're going to, by using Control I to invert it, you're going to soften the photo. So let's do a Control I, and there you go. You can see it softened it. So redo, oops, undo. There's it sharp, and there's it softened. So if you're ever wanting to soften a portrait photo, this actually is a nice technique. Just do that inverse. I love it. That's cool. Now here's another example of how blurring works. It's strange, I know, just accept that it works. You're going to duplicate the layer, you're going to do a filter Gaussian blur, and then you're going to do either an overlay or a vivid light blending mode. Okay, let's go into Photoshop and try this out. Here we got an original layer, and I'm going to duplicate it. I duplicate it several just because I like to preserve my original. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and of course, this is that same thing that you're doing. You recognize that radius. This is how far out it blurs from the edges it finds. So I don't know how much you do. There's no right or wrong to this. You just try it, and if you don't like it, undo it and try it again. So let's move it way up so it's way blurry. Not too way blurry. Let's just see what happens. So we do this and we change it to an overlay, and you can see this not only sharpens it, but it brings some vibrancy to it. Kind of cool, huh? What was the other one we used? Or vivid light. Let's go see. Whoa, didn't work well with this particular image. So let's hit undo and see what happens if we sharpen this a little less. So it's just finding the edges more. Kind of like changing that threshold in the other settings. Hopefully you're beginning to understand how this is working. And we change it to overlay, and you can see that's much better because we lowered that threshold down some, or it not necessarily the threshold, but the second one, the radius. Kind of working the same, hopefully you can see. And then if this is blurred too much, then you can lower the opacity and see the change. Let's see what vivid light does now. Whoa, that kind of vivid light makes the dark shadows over here not too pleasant. Soft light might work. Nope, doesn't work as well in this one. Overlay works best. So, but that gives you another example, and you can kind of see what that does before and after. So, caution, red light. Remember, more is not always better, especially in sharpening and especially on faces. I don't sharpen faces and don't sharpen skin, and don't sharpen black. Black doesn't sharpen very well. Overcorrecting blurring results in noise. That's what you're getting when you try to sharpen tuxes. And sharpen in moderation, which is the same thing as saying don't over sharpen, which is the same thing as saying more is not always better. And I'm going to say it again, overcorrecting blur results in noise. Don't do it. Overcorrecting sharpening is not good. Sharpen in moderation. Can't repeat that enough, because when you go to print out, you'll go, what in the world happened to my images? Because they might look okay on the screen, but they won't look good when you go to print them out. So do not over sharpen. Sharpen in moderation. Got it? I think you got it. Can't stress it enough. So I look forward to seeing the before and after of your images after you've sharpened it. Have fun.